the really important part that I think designers miss, and again, I think it's because they're so wrapped up in trying to shine in all these other areas, is they forget that it takes like a dozen people working their tushes off to make me look good. I can design anything, but I need a carpenter, I need an electrician, I need a plumber, I need a painter, a cabinet maker. I mean, on and on and on, in order for that drawing I made to be beautiful.
All right. I'm Rebecca Hay, and I've built a successful interior design business by trial and error, podcasts, online courses, and so many freaking books. Over the last decade, I've grown from an insecure student to having false starts to careers, and now I'm finally in the place where I want to be. Throughout my journey, it's been pretty obvious that I'm passionate about business and helping other entrepreneurs do the same. Each week, I'll share tangible takeaways from my own experience and the experiences of other badass women to help you build your confidence and change your business. Hey, it's Rebecca, and you are listening to Resilient by Design. Today's episode is so good. It's all about construction. Designers, if you spend any tiny bit of your project on a job site, renovating, remodeling, even just doing the tiniest bit of work with any type of trade or subtrade, this episode is for you. I am here with the host of the Only Girl on the Job Site podcast, the podcast that I was recently on where we talked about everything under the moon. Today, we have a more focused conversation about construction. Specifically, we talk about going from commercial to residential and some of the changes that we need to make as design professionals to be successful. And ultimately, the bulk of our conversation is about finding that unicorn trade, the process of finding the right trades to work with, and then how do you nurture those relationships so that you have a long, growing, standing, successful, healthy relationship with your trades. Guys, you're really going to enjoy this episode with Renee. Boom. Renee, welcome to Resilient by Design.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on my podcast because I was just on your podcast. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about who you are and all about your podcast?
Sure. I'm Renee Biery. I'm an interior designer, and I specialize in luxury construction projects, whether that's a new build or smaller renovations. And I have a podcast called Only Girl on the Job Site, which Rebecca was on a couple of weeks ago, where we had a
free-form conversation.
Covered a lot of territory. Yes. Which was great, which was really amazing. And my listeners actually, you don't always hear from listeners, episode to episode. And I got a lot of emails saying how fun it was, that they felt a part of the conversation and learned a lot from us, which was great, right? That's the whole point of this.
That's amazing. Yeah. So we talked about pricing. We talked about artificial intelligence.
Yep.
What else did we talk about?
I don't know how we got onto that one.
No idea.
Well, I think we just talked about just being in this business and having done it for the decades that we have done and the experiences that we bring to the table and the fact that you and I both love to give back and support other female designers to have them excel in the industry that we've grown to love.
Totally. Yeah. I'm going to listen to that again one day. I think after I listened to it the first time, I was like, oh boy, I don't even know if I added value. That was like so wild, but it was truly just like when you're with a girlfriend having a chat. So yeah, guys, go listen to that episode. Tell us what you think.
The good part is we may not have known that there was any value, but I have been told specifically how much value that we brought to the listeners, which is great. Right. Amazing. Because I think also when we're as far into our careers as we are, we tend to forget what is valuable and what isn't, right? Because a lot of what we do at this stage of our careers is muscle memory. But there's a lot of people listening, at least to my podcast, where it hasn't become muscle memory. And so when we say something sort of probably without even thinking about it, others are like scrambling to write it down and so somehow incorporate it into their own businesses.
Yeah, totally. So saying that, actually, Today, I feel like I have a feeling like today's episode is going to be one of those ones where you'll want to take notes. So if you're driving, obviously don't take notes.
Please don't.
But if you're not driving, you might just want to get a notepad handy. I feel like it's going to be one of those episodes.
I hope so. I actually had a listener once say they jog to my episodes. That was a first. I said, I hope they're long enough. She's like, yeah, they're just the right length.
Not too long. Don't go on longer because I don't finish it. That's awesome.
I might fall down. Yeah.
I've had those moments where I'm out for a walk listening to a podcast and I'm like, oh, I have to stop, pause. I need to put that in my phone for later. And I put it into my Asana and I task it for myself for the next day so I don't lose it. Because there's so much wisdom on podcasts, like just somebody talking about their experience. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about your experience in construction and working with trades. That's why I think it's going to be a good one. So if you are out jogging, get ready to stop, drop, and write on your phone. So on that note, let's dive into the content for today. But before we do that, I love your story because a lot of my listeners maybe don't know who you are. They don't know your story. Can you just share how you got to where you are today? Like that transition from your early years as a designer to where you are now?
Sure. I have always loved interior design. I can't explain when it started, but my first job in the business was as a senior in high school. And I was fortunate enough to really do nothing else. I think I had 2 summer jobs at the beach in college, but truly every other job I've ever had was in the field. I went to the New York School of Interior Design and got my graduate degree and started working for really amazing firms, top AD 100 firms that I was young enough that I knew it was a big deal, but I really didn't know until I now look back going, wow, was I really on those jobs? Like, this is great. So it was good. I was young. And then I started my own firm, Devigny Design I moved back out of New York City to Delaware, where I'm from, and started my own firm in 2000. And that was when I realized that what I had been doing, which was construction management, was not done everywhere by interior designers. It was taught to me at grad school. It was what the firms I worked for in New York were doing. They would, our client would buy the apartment next door or above or below, and we'd have to blow through. And then, okay, you've got 2 kitchens, you got all these wacky, passageways that don't make sense anymore. And we'd rearrange them all. Our clients had a lot of beautiful brownstone townhouses and same thing. And so I moved back to Delaware, just assuming, just keep on moving, and met an enormous brick wall. Contractors, architects, pretty much everybody had no interest in me. They said they'd call me when I needed furniture. And so I slowly, actually it was the clients that would bring me on, and I had to just prove myself one job at a time. So fast forward to COVID, where we all unfortunately had some downtime. I joined an online course with Toby Fairley, Design You, and I had sort of felt like maybe I was a midlife crisis, maybe mid-career crisis. Like, I've seen it, I've done it, I've been doing it for a little over 25 years. I kind of wanted to see what else I could do. And Toby really opened my eyes to online and podcasting. And I sat there and listened and took lots of notes and was like, I'll never do any of this. It's not for me. And of course, I was wrong. So I started a podcast, Only Girl on the Job Site. Initially, it was meant for homeowners because during COVID, I wasn't allowed to go to a lot of projects anymore. So I was doing a lot of my work through FaceTime and Zoom and phone calls. And hell, I used like a carrier pigeon, it felt like at certain points. And I realized I could probably give some basic steps to homeowners. And then designers showed up like in full force. And I just was sure initially they were checking me out, like, what is she up to? And I was wrong. They would email me like, oh my God, I'm on this job site. I don't know what I'm doing. This went wrong. How do I help? And so I pivoted and shifted the entire podcast to supporting interior designers. I have always felt that we are not competitors. We're coworkers, essentially. We all work for the same goal. We want our clients to be happy. Rebecca and I are not competitors at all. We're colleagues. And so I find sharing information does not take anything away from me and my business and my work. If anything, the saying, rising tides lift all boats. I really firmly believe in that. And then out of the podcast, I developed an online course, the Interior Designer's Guide to Construction Management, because it really does take it to the next step, right? There's only so much that you can explain in a podcast, and the course itself really does go into the granular details of managing construction projects, because I firmly believe that is going to be the game changer for our industry, as all the access that we once loved. I mean, I remember real access where there was no internet. You really had to be, completely educated, and all these, various levels you had to achieve in order to get trade access and things like that. And that's all going in different directions, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And while we are shifting and figuring that out, construction management cannot be, I call it restoration hardwared, right? You can't just go into a store and have that expertise given to you. Mm-hmm. So I really, really encourage interior designers, and I know so many of your listeners are already managing construction projects for their clients. I just find that a lot of them have, I want to say, gotten into it by happenstance, more like, oh, hey, a good client has said, hey, now I'm doing a bathroom. Can you help me? As opposed to proactively really learning the steps, the skills, and then marketing for it. So many designers do a lot of the work, but they don't actually market themselves for it, because I find that they are lacking the confidence that they can. And so that's really what the purpose of the podcast and the course is, to build the confidence, equip the designers with the skills and techniques that they need to really make them be an expert in that niche and stand out from their competition, so to speak.
Totally. I love that. I love your story. I just get this visual of you in like high fashion New York City, fancy clients with all this money, and then moving home, the country bumpkin, to Delaware. I mean, I've never been to Delaware, but I have a picture in my mind of what it would be. And it's like stark contrast, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
And the last woman I worked with in New York City was the preeminent Art Deco interior designer. So my portfolio, now mind you, these were photographs printed out in a book, because again, pre-internet, pre-digital world. I had to stop showing people. They were like, what the hell is that?
Right. It was too beyond, too creative,
big city, too big city, too slick. My favorite was, so this was in 2000. And my favorite was, people were like, well, I don't like Art Deco, but I'm really interested in that old Hollywood glamour. I'm like, yeah,
same thing.
That is Art Deco. So, okay. So I just removed the term Art Deco from my language and said old Hollywood. I mean, it was crazy, Rebecca. I was like, oh my God, I've left the city, right?
Which shouldn't surprise you. You said you grew up there, but I guess you really grew up in the city, right? Like you grow, but professionally, for sure. Yeah. You grow into your taste, your likes, who you are. I love that. I think that's what I also like about that is it shows resilience.
Yes.
In that you can move cities, change direction, and you might stumble a little and you have to find your footing, but you can be successful. So for designers listening, hearing that, because I know we have a lot of designers in our community that have been working in the corporate world. They've been doing corporate design, commercial design, hospitality design. Some of them who are, in our courses and in our community have already made that leap to go out on their own, like you did. But some of them are listening and they're not there yet. They're on the fence and they're nervous and they're scared. So I love that you're such a great example of someone who went from that security, like there was job security there, right? There was a steady paycheck. I'm sure there were benefits. There was probably also a little bit of, not notoriety, but like, people knew who you were. You could go to the showrooms. You knew where to shop. You had your sources. Like you had it all. You were like in one of those movies, right?
Yes.
And then it's like one of those, who does those movies? Oh my God, I'm totally going on the sidebar. That's the blonde. Is it not Renee Zellweger? Oh, Reese Witherspoon. Love Reese. She always does those movies, right? Where she's like the city girl. And then she goes home and of course she falls in love with a country boy. But like that idea, right? Like here's the city girl in the country.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
No,
picturing.
and look, the reality is I did not move home by choice. Well, I guess ultimately it was by choice. It was not my plan to move home. I actually was being offered to take over the firm that I worked for, and the woman was retiring. About 6 weeks after she made me that offer, she had a tragedy in her family, and she could no longer retire. And in my head, it felt like a demotion to go back to my senior designer position. But you're right. I mean, I was sought after. We shopped for furniture in Architectural Digest, and we would just call the antique dealer directly and say, hey, can you bring up that piece? We want to see it in the apartment. They said, sure. How's tomorrow? I mean, this is the access I had. And yes, I absolutely could have stayed as a senior designer at her firm and loved every minute of it. But I think being given that opportunity to own, to really take new direction to a firm, it just planted its seed. And I was like, I just can't stay. I stayed with her for about 7 more months to kind of get her settled. And the phone kept ringing. People had heard that, I wasn't going to be taking over, and they wanted to hire me on the side. And back then, it's still a little bit today, but back then our industry worked Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. There were no weekends. There was no internet. I would have been cheating on her. And that's, to me, ethically, I couldn't do. But no, it was not in my plan at all to move back to Delaware. I still, 23 years later, I'm like, wow, I live here. Holy cow, when did that happen? But I want to say to your friends listening who do commercial work, I did too. Before my last job, I was given a really big opportunity that I guess at the time it made sense. An architecture firm that did both hospitality and commercial and some residential was hiring me as the interior design director, and they wanted me to build the department. And I thought, holy cow, like this sounds great. So I did. And it was fascinating. I learned very quickly that architects really do see things differently than we do. I was the only interior designer in the entire company. I think there was about 40 people. The only other females were support staff. That was interesting. I was young. I was in my late 20s, and most of the support staff was at least 10 years older than me. But I did everything. I did huge buildings. We did law offices. Hell, I even did a prison. Yeah, pinnacle of my career. I learned a lot about commercial. I actually apply a lot of that to my construction work, all that HVAC systems, all of that. I really dug in when I worked in commercial work. It is 100% possible to pivot from commercial to residential. You really just need to mind your words and how you describe the work you do. Like, for instance, I took Art Deco out of my language and said old Hollywood glam. It's the exact same thing, but it was what people wanted to hear. So, for instance, I did a lot of law offices. Delaware is filled with bankers and lawyers, and I did a ton of law offices. So I talked about the partners' offices I did. It's basically like doing the living room, right? You really learn how to reframe the work you do and how it's going to apply to the person that you want to pitch your new product to. And your new product may be high-end luxury residential.
I think you highlighted an important distinction, I think, there between commercial and residential design is a lot of it comes down to the semantics, the terminology. And what I see, and I've done I've done lots of residential, I've done some commercial and hospitality design. And what I've seen on the side of being a residential designer, going to commercial, and then seeing the students that are in our programs that come from commercial, everyone's using really fancy terms.
Yes.
I mean, we call it HVAC, HVAC. That's not one of the fancy ones, but there's all kinds of, I'm going to do I don't know, I can't even come up with them on the spot, but there's lots of terminology that it's intimidating. So if it's intimidating to a residential designer who's already a designer and understands already a ton of what's going on and has their own terminology, imagine the homeowner.
Correct.
It can be a little bit intimidating. And I think that's something that I coach my students through is I know that's professional and I know that's how it's done. Even in school, we're taught certain terms and ways to do things in school. Like even saying AutoCAD plans sounds so simple and basic. And yet I find myself more and more lately just talking about floor plans.
Yes.
The house plans.
Yep.
Because it feels more approachable and you want to make your client feel like they're taken care of. And it's not that you're trying to dumb it down, but you do want to bring it into more layman's terms so that they understand.
And do they care if you used AutoCAD to do it? No, they want to know that you're making a floor plan.
Yeah,
I agree with you. And also, and when I was back there doing it, HVAC, if I said that in a residential, they'd be like, what does that even mean? Now, I mean, so some terms have become more mainstream. But the other thing I think that commercial designers need to think about and really lean into is their ability to work with budgets, because there's a vast difference between a commercial project budget and a residential project budget. And let's be honest about that, right? A commercial budget is tight and fast, and you better meet it or come under it. A residential, all right, we're going to be honest here, right? There's some wiggle room. You're going to show them something fabulous, and somehow they're going to find that extra 10 grand, right? Or whatever it is.
Because it's an emotional decision.
Exactly. And so that's a plus. The negative is the emotional side, right? I loved presenting commercial projects. There was a room full of, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 people. They were both mostly bored. They were like, okay, is it going to be on time? Is it going to be on budget? Yeah, I guess I like that one better. Boom. Yeah. There's no like hemming and hawing and emotions. And so it really is something, one, I think that should give a designer pause. If they're not good with dealing with those emotions, they may be better served staying in commercial world, because those emotions really go away.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, I certainly had a hard time with this starting out, is that I'm an emotional person. And so I would take things very personally, and I was very sensitive. So if the client said they didn't like that shade of blue, for example, I'm thinking, well, fuck, like that shade of blue was picked because of the fabric and it's in the flower. And then that ties in with the terrazzo. And like, if I change that shade of blue, everything has to change. And in my head, I'm having this whole explosion. Yeah. And then I'm having to talk myself off the ledge so that I can then communicate with the client. Whereas in commercial, they're not going to live there as long as it looks good most of the time. I mean, obviously there's some wiggle room, and there's always that opinionated board member or what have you.
Yes.
But yeah, okay. I want to take us down a different rabbit hole into these trades, because I think coming back to you, going from New York to Delaware, starting your own business, because a lot of my listeners are, I don't know, maybe 1 to 2 years into their business. They've had some projects under their belt. Maybe they photographed a few spaces and they've worked with a few trades, but they're feeling like, I haven't found my unicorn yet. And I don't feel like I'm in charge of the project, especially the construction, because I haven't found that right contractor or builder. So maybe can we talk a little bit about that process of how do you find the right trades?
So Rebecca, if I have that all figured out, you'll never hear from me again. I will have bought an island somewhere beautiful, and I will be off the grid. No, it is a challenge that seasoned designers have. It is a challenge new designers have. I will say it's easier now with the dawn of Instagram and internet and searches and things like that. And then the other thing I try to always dispel is stop looking for the unicorn. You may get lucky, and I'll tell you in a second, I have gotten lucky, but also unicorns aren't, of course, what we all think they should be, right? So I think really the goal should be less, let me find that perfect one, and find more of, I need to find a couple that I really like to work with, that respect me and want to work with me. And mainly because of skill sets. So I did actually find a unicorn, and it was about 15 years ago. Well, I've been working for 30 years. So it tells you how many years I didn't have a unicorn, and I was just as successful, right? My unicorn has limits. Todd is, we joke, he's the brother from another mother, but he won't do a new build. He's like, nope, won't do it anymore. He used to. He's like, I don't feel like it anymore. He has some quirks, as we all do. There's just always some limits. So to say like, oh, I've got my unicorn, I'm set for life. I want to dispel that, because I do have a unicorn. And I will say projects are much smoother with him because we blur the lines. And that's probably the best way to put it. Like, I'll be like, hey, I need a favor. Can you go run and pick this up for me? He's like, sure. Now, could I ask other contractors to do that? Probably not. Might be able to with a few, but it would be a major favor. For me, it's like I send him a quick text like, hey, I'm running behind. Would you grab it? Sure, I'll grab it. But the most successful designers have several good contractors. And I don't want to call them unicorns because a lot of contractors like different types of work. And so a new build contractor typically doesn't like renovation work because it's too small, right? Or their subs don't work because they're not doing rough plumbing, right? There's all sorts of levels to it. So my best suggestion to any designer, whether they're seasoned or new, is, well, two things. One, if you can do your own home project, that is what I did in Delaware. It was not intentional, but I fell in love with this really old townhouse and it was a dump. And I saw it once at night, I think, well, late in the day. I had taken the train down from New York. I meant to go sooner. I saw it late. I flew back up there, took the train back up to New York the next morning, called one of my best friends, told her, I said, I think I just bought a house. She goes, oh my God. I gave her the address. She goes, you bought that dump? I'm like, oh my God, I bought a dump. Right? It was total impulse. I needed somewhere to live and I gutted it. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences and one of the most terrible experiences. I fired guys because, of course, I knew what I was doing. They did not know or did not assume I knew what I was doing, even though I told them. And I did learn a lot about the local trades. And yeah, I was a total New York snob as far as that level of quality. And I may or may not have had to knock it a step down. I still am very particular about my guys and who I will work with. But back then, again, there was no internet. I had to do word of mouth. And that's brutal. Now with the internet, this is what I do. Start looking at architects in your area. They'll tag who did the work. Start with them, right? Reach out to them. Now, they're not going to tag the plumber, but they'll tag the contractor. The contractor is who you want to first talk with. And then they typically have subs that they like to work with. Right. And so that you start sort of chipping away from that aspect and you will start finding it's a smaller world than you think. Even in big cities, it's a small world when you're working on that level.
Yeah. I love that. I love that how you can use Instagram to find, I've definitely found contractors that way in Toronto, even ones that I haven't worked with yet, but I know I want to.
Absolutely.
And when I have the right project, I'm going to go to them and get them to price it and let's have a conversation.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
Also, photographers. I found a great photographer that way through a designer I'm about half an hour from Philadelphia. And we don't have a lot of interior photographers in my area, which I know comes as a huge surprise. And shocking. And so I really like these images. I'm like, who is taking these photos? Because unfortunately, photographers don't always get tagged, although they're supposed to be. Finally, someone tagged me. I'm like, oh my God, I got to call this guy. He's been great. We've worked together now for like 5 or 6 years, probably.
Awesome.
But if you're not on Instagram and that feels odd or whatever, you also talk to realtors. They should be talking to realtors anyway, as far as like an industry partner, but the realtors always have that list, right? They have their flooring guy, their painting guy. You may not like them. And again, you will definitely move on from some of them. And I still do. I maybe work 2 projects a year with Todd. And so when I get them, I'm like, whew, it's going to be much more relaxing than the next one. But no, it is a lot. I don't want to say easier, but it is easier to locate them. Then you got to do the research. You really have to do referral work, call their references. So often I have a designer be like, oh my God, this plumber sucks. And I'm like, well, where'd you find him? Oh, so-and-so referred him. And I'm like, great. What did they think? Oh, well, I never saw his work. I didn't really talk to him. I called them. I'm like, well, then I hate to say it, but that's kind of on you. If they're actually giving you references and you don't run them down, then what are you supposed to do? Right? Someone's trying to give you that help. You got to take it.
I'd also add, do your research. Just because a designer or an architect or whoever tags someone on Instagram does not equal their positive testimonial or their endorsement.
100%.
And that's something that I've learned. And I've had designers approach me about like a vendor who I maybe tag because maybe they partnered with me in some capacity. And they're like, oh, hey, I saw you worked with this company. Like, are they great? And I'm like, call me on the phone.
Yeah.
Let me help you and tell you not to work with them.
Absolutely.
Or at least tell you, hey, I just want you to know that this looks really pretty in the picture, but my experience was really challenging and difficult. And here's why. And so I probably won't use them again.
Right.
So don't make an assumption because you see someone tag or talk to or go do a lunch and learn with another vendor or supplier, that is them endorsing that supplier.
100%.
Do your research 100%.
That's where you get your shortlist. And then you've got to do the groundwork. And frankly, people I like to work with, you may not like to work with. Right. So that's another level. And the other component that I really love to do, and I still do it today, is, I've got an electrician who I adore, and I was looking for a tile setter, and we were working on a bathroom. And I said, hey, he works on other jobs for lots of other people. I was like, have you seen a tile setter that you really like? Or he's like, you know what? I did watch this one guy. He's young. I think he's up and coming. And let me give him your name. Great. So I have at least a 1 degree, right, association. So when I call, I can say, hey, I heard you did a job alongside, obviously, with Alan. Let me hear more about your experience and your, what your business plan is. That's the other thing, is you want to find people that are aligned with you. If they're snooty on the phone because you're an interior designer, they're like, why the hell are you calling me? Then you move on quickly, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of people in a designer's orbit that they can tap into that I think they're afraid to do. And that's where this confidence piece keeps coming in. They're afraid to admit they don't have a good tile installer. Well, guess what? My tile installer was phenomenal. He retired. Okay, so now I have no tile installer. Does that make me lesser? No, of course not. Just makes me looking for a new tile installer. And then I think that it really needs to come across as that, right? Especially the designers that are newer to being on a construction site. They're like, all this is intimidating. I'm learning it all at one time. That's okay. That contractor had a first day too. May have been 15 years ago, but I bet he remembers.
I love hearing you say that you could have the perfect trade or someone that always does a beautiful job, but they can leave you too. They can retire. They can move to another city, right? They can get too busy to take on that project. So, we're always looking in Instagram. I always go back to this because Instagram is that place where you see everyone doing such a better job than you are, bigger, better projects. They're more successful. And obviously this is not true, but this is the perception. And you're right. People assume like, oh, I'm not going to ask for a tile setter because that makes me look like maybe I don't have my team together or I don't have my shit together. And there's that confidence piece and recognizing that even the biggest designers in the world are constantly having to work with new trades.
Yeah.
And so you're always looking and finding great people to work with.
Absolutely. I worked for those firms. I can attest. We were always looking for someone. Fill in the blank.
Even big builders. It's so funny because up here, it might be pretty unique to where I live in Toronto, the Greater Toronto area. There's still a massive construction boom, and there's these new communities like subdivisions being built. And I've worked with some of those builders. And you would assume, because these are multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollar projects, that they've got their trades. And I had a conversation with someone in that builder community a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying, we just can't get good tilers. It was specifically about the tiling. And so I'm helping make selections. And so I have to choose a 12 by 24 because it'll be easier for them to install. And they don't want to risk doing a smaller tile because it blah, 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 and the grout and all the things. And it's not that easy. I love that you said that. Thank you for dispelling this myth. It's not like everyone who's successful has found their trades. That's it. Let's talk about something else. That's not how it goes.
I wish. That sounds delightful.
All right, designers, I know you're always looking for a great insider resource. And if you're looking for custom furniture like a wall unit, a vanity, a dining table, a coffee table, a chest of drawers, you name it, look no further than Abacus Furniture. They have been handcrafting custom furniture one piece at a time here in Toronto since 1973. We use them almost exclusively for all of our interior design and decorating projects. They can take your sketch or your photo and they can build you the custom piece exactly as you envision it. You can use Abacus for any of your projects. Contact them at abacusfurniture.com or send Kelly an email, kelly@abacusfurniture.com, and be sure to let her know that you heard about them from here. You have a great email newsletter that comes out, or email, whatever, weekly email. And I read it, I don't know if it was last week or the week before. And you talked about how your trades were really there for you when you moved your mother, I believe it was, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it got me thinking about the trades that I've worked with over the years and how I have had trades like that who are just like, here, let me come and help you. I'll help you rebuild your porch, Rebecca. And they don't even charge me. Yep. Or they are like, we'll just do it at my cost. And they go that extra mile, or they do that favor for you and they go pick up the tile, or they go pick up the toilet from the wholesaler. And so let's talk about building that relationship, because people are listening. They're like, okay, great. So I have some trades and they're okay, but how do you get to that place where, yes, personality is an element, but I have seen it go both ways, where you could be the designer and you are not connecting with the trade and the trade doesn't want to do anything for you. So then another person comes in, treats the trade a little bit differently, has a different relationship, and that same trade is jumping through hoops and helping the other designer. Do you want to talk about that? And like, there's certain things that we can do to foster those relationships, right, Renee?
Yeah, there absolutely. And I think I don't want to say the fundamental problem, but a large problem is designers on construction sites that aren't 100% comfortable on them are so wrapped up in all the details and trying to get it all right and what's coming next and this decision and that decision. They forget that those relationships are critical to the success of any project for that very reason. I mean, when shit falls through the cracks, you can either have contractors point fingers at you, or you can have contractors call you, on the side or text you and be like, hey, where's that toilet? We need it next week. And you're like, oh shit, I got to get that order. Where is it? Oh, it's picked up. Yeah. It really does seem simplistic, but if a group of contractors, trades don't know you that well, and there's any kind of friction on the site, I always tell my clients, if I'm not in the room, I'm under the bus. And that is the truth on some sites. They are looking, I hate to say this, they're looking for a scapegoat. And being the only girl on the job site, you're typically target one. And so I combat that by building relationships from the moment I step foot on that project. And it's hard for designers because, there's, quote, an order of things, right? You hire an architect, then you hire the contractor, then the designer. Well, in my New York days, we were all hired on the same day. It was such a collaborative world. It was lovely. And the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, screw it, I'm going back to New York.
What the hell are you doing in Delaware, girl? Get yourself back there. Sounds amazing.
Let's just say one phrase: quality of life.
Also, when we look back, it's interesting what the brain does.
Yes.
Right? Our brain tends to remember just the highlights.
But also, please remember, I was single. Well, I had a black Labrador. That was it. Right. And I now have 2 kids, a husband, all sorts of other life things going on. But the thing is, the really important part that I think designers miss, and again, I think it's because they're so wrapped up in trying to shine in all these other areas, is they forget that the only way to shine, I tell my kids this all the time, it takes like a dozen people working their tushes off to make me look good. I can design anything, but I need a carpenter, I need an electrician, I need a plumber, I need a painter, a cabinet maker. I mean, on and on and on, in order for that drawing I made to be beautiful. Mm-hmm. Now, in the end, I have some torn feelings about it. In the end, you're like, look at my design. You're going, well, actually, Renee, there's a shit ton of people behind you that made that design, right? Let's be honest and open about that. So that's my attitude. Hey, we're in this together. These are my drawings. These are important to me. My client, has blessed them and has trusted us to bring them to life. That being said, do I come across cranky ass old guys who call me little lady and, talk down to me and all? Yes, I do. And the reality is, when I was younger and newer in my career, I sort of didn't know. I was like, I need to brush it off and sort of like leave the room. Now I'm like, listen, the reality is I quickly process. Are they being an ass? Are they trying to demean me? Or is this just how this old guy talks? Right? Because there are a lot of old guys who are like, hey, little lady, and they're not trying to insult me. So if I get a little lady, I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't been called that a lot in a while. This makes me feel young. Thank you so much. And they kind of look at you like, oh, wait. And more often than not, they don't even know they said it. And they certainly didn't mean it in a demeaning way. God's truth. 85% of the time, these comments are not made to demean me. They almost don't know they're saying it. I do my best to kind of be one of the guys. Here's one tip. You do not walk on a construction project in open-toed shoes, sandals, skirts. I mean, it's not appropriate. The guys on your team are in work boots. I don't wear work boots, I will say. I do wear nice shoes. I'm a shoe person. But I wear comfortable shoes that are closed-toed. I wear pants because I don't know if I'm going to be on the ladder that day because they need me to look at something. So I do know some designers, they get in their own way because they don't feel that they're a part of the team. And that to me is mistake number one that is so easy to fix.
Yes.
Have I gone on a job site in a dress or a skirt? I have. It's more like I had a meeting and then I got a call. Hey, can you stop by? I typically, if I'm wearing sandals in the summer, you'll find a pair of loafers in my back seat, just in case I need to swap out. And typically, I kid you not, anytime I walk on a site in a dress or a skirt, the guys treat me differently. They don't even know they're doing it. Because the ones I know well enough, I'll call them out on it. Same if I get my nails done. I will have guys like, hey, Renee, let me get that box for you. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You didn't offer last week.
That's amazing. Not amazing, but It's funny.
We could have a whole episode on the gender issues.
You know what? I bet that varies from state to state,
yes,
to city, to province, to town, like in country to country.
Yes.
Right. It depends on so many things, like the background of those particular trades. Like there's so many factors, but that's like a whole other interesting study, actually.
Oh, terrifying.
We're not going to go there. We're not going to follow that rabbit. Don't follow that rabbit, Rebecca.
But I think that's part of the building of the relationships. You are a member of a team. You're not in charge of that team. You're an equal standing. You're not lesser than. Even when I build my own team, I approach it as I'm a member of that team. And I think that really serves me well because they don't feel like they work for me. Well, in fact, they don't. They work for the client. And that's how I explain it. I'm like, look, we all have one purpose on this project. And that's to bring this design to life. Let's make it successful. Let's make it fun. I mean, let's have some fun. If we're going to be here day in and day out for months and years at a time, hell, let's have it some fun. And so, I mean, I have a son who's very interested in the NFL. I did not grow up watching it, but I watch it with him now. And here's a fun fact. It's made me so much more relevant on job sites. It's hilarious. And I thank my son for that. I'm like, oh my God, I know what to talk about with the guys now.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
It was not intentional. And I'm not telling designers.
That's obviously an American thing, but
it is an American thing.
Yeah, that's awesome though.
But it just was a happenstance. They were talking and I jumped in, so I think that's where I think designers, again, it's the confidence. It's the confidence. They don't feel like they belong there. And so that is what they're exuding.
It's like they feel like they need to compensate. And I've 100%. Been that designer. Oh my God, where I felt I didn't feel confident enough. And so I would rely on the drawings. I would say, well, it's in the plan. You didn't look at the AutoCAD plan, and I would get defensive. And you're so right. I think I had a moment where I realized, and I was working with my previous boss, and he brought me back to work on a project with him. We had this big, beautiful new build in this lovely area in Toronto. And I'd been on my own for a long time at that point. And he brought me back. So it was a big project. So we were doing it together. And I saw how much effort he put into the relationships with this builder. This was a new builder. He hadn't worked with him before. And I was like, oh yeah, Rebecca, remember, it's not just all about business.
It's not.
You need to learn people's names.
Correct.
You need to come in, treat them like a human and ask, hey, how was your son's hockey game? Or you don't have to become super personal, but I think if there's an opportunity to have a conversation that is about the weather, about sports, about the news, whatever it might be, to just lighten the mood. Because if you make it super serious, ultimately people are going to get scared. They're going to feel like they're walking on eggshells, and they will either hide mistakes from you or they will point fingers at you. And so I know there's a hierarchy to an extent in some ways, but in other ways, we're all, like you said, on the same team. And it's how can we work together? And as much as you want them to have your back, you need to have their back too.
Absolutely. 100% agree with everything you just said, especially the name part. And I am horrible at names. I mean, lifelong. Me too.
I'm saying that, issue. I'm like, oh, it's like I constantly struggle with it.
So here, people can walk away with this one. So obviously, you're the only girl on the job site. They have one name to remember, right? It's not that hard. It's Renee. Occasionally, I get Rachel, but it's usually Renee, and they get it spot on.
I get Rachel too.
Not funny.
We have that in common.
Yeah,
yeah.
And then, but there could be 10 guys on a job site, and they might change, or it might be a helper. And so I always say, like, if I approach a kid and I'm going, oh my God, was it Tom or Tim? Tom? Oh, no, wait, it was Tim. Oh crap, I think it's Tom. I will literally say, I am 100% terrible with names. I believe your name is Tom. And every time they go, no big deal. It's actually Tim. I'm like, nah, I knew it, but I didn't say it. Because guess what? That makes me human. So, I've had a couple of designers be like, well, that's not my job, Renee. My job is to do X, whatever it is, be hired by the client, do the design, run the job. And actually, it is a part of your job.
Yeah.
And I really want to make that clear. It is a part of your job. It is not a part of your job to suck up to people. I had this one designer say, well, I'm not going to bake banana bread every time I go over. And I'm like, well, good, because who knows if they like banana bread. But you know what? We worked a really long project, and it was bitter cold. Our meetings were at 8 a.m. and it was freezing there. It was where the top of the soil, well, you're in Toronto, but the top of the soil was frozen, right? And yeah, I stopped at Dunkin' Donuts and I got coffees and I got hot chocolates and I got 24 donuts. Did anyone ask me to do it? Nope. It was no special meeting. I just knew it was a shitty day and that everybody was going to be freezing. The roof was on, but no windows, no insulation. I walked in there and they looked, honestly, Rebecca, I could have brought them gold bullion. They thought this was the most amazing thing. And I was like, God, and I even joked, I was like, you guys are cheap dates. Like, wow, this is all it takes. And then the best part, I'm sitting there talking, I've got my coffee. They were razzing the guys that were getting the hot chocolate, right? Guess what? The entire day was like the most productive day because we were hanging out. The meeting probably ran another 20 minutes longer than it should have. And whatever. It is team building, team bonding. All the other friends of ours at work, they have these team bonding moments.
Totally.
Well, that's what this becomes. Did I do it again? I think I actually did it one other time. So it's not something that was assumed.
Yeah, it's not something that they come to expect of you. So that every time Renee comes, there's coffee.
Right.
But I love that. I mean, that's something that I do and that Stephen, who I worked for, used to do. We used to go up north when we were working in Muskoka, and we would go once a week, and it was winter and it was cold. And we would always stop and pick up Tim Hortons and some Timbits on the way up. And you know what? It just made the experience so much better. And at the end of the project, guess what? Stephen stopped at the beer store, bought a big case of 2-4s.
Yep.
And after we walked the clients through or whatever, I don't remember what the day was, and everyone just had a beer.
Yep.
And they went the extra mile. So there's a lot to be said for just those small acts of kindness.
100%. Because that's all they are. It's not a bribe. It's a small act of kindness. So for instance, my husband had a meeting in Philadelphia last night, or at 3. He texted at 5:30. He's like, hey, it really went well. We're going to go grab a beer. That's the same thing, right? So it's funny that our industry looks at it like, oh, you're sucking up or you're bribing. No, I'm team building. And my team just happens to be a whole bunch of guys, right? I don't have a lot of girls sitting around. It's typically just me and the guys. So I'm going to get something that they like. And it was probably about 40 degrees. And, hot chocolate, coffee, and donuts seemed appropriate. And they loved it.
I think too, as a business owner, as a design firm owner, we're concerned always about the bottom line, and not that the cost of the coffee is expensive, but your time.
Yes.
And I know for me in the early years, I was so stressed. I was so fucking stressed out. Pardon for swearing in this episode. This now has to be a X-rated episode, but I was so stressed all the time because I was trying to cram too much into my day. And so I wouldn't have had the time to go stop 20 minutes to go to Starbucks or wherever, to Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons here, to then go to site. Are you kidding me? Oh my God. I would have not had the extra, like I try to fit so much into one single day. And that's a whole other conversation. And I talk a lot about that on the podcast, but is about time blocking and understanding, like giving yourself that space so that you do have the time and the capacity to do those little things.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because there's a lot of designers that do, like I said, they sort of stumble into construction. And so they take on little things here and there, and then they want to up level it. And that's typically where they come, they join that course and they learn how to up level it. But here's the thing, they also need to up level their mindset on time, because my days, no matter what, if I'm on a construction project, my days start between 7:30 and 8. So when I don't have a construction project, I'm like, woohoo, I don't sleep in, but I'm like, woohoo, I don't have to work till probably like 9 or 10 even. I could actually go to the gym. Like, what does that look like? So I think that's the difference, right? Because it's a totally different animal. You're sort of on call, right? Because all hell can break loose at any moment on a job site, especially, during a demo phase or something like that. And designers who are coming over from predominantly decorating, they don't quite get that part because they haven't experienced it. But they need to, like you said, not overbook, not take on, when I have a designer reach out to me, like, I'm just taking on 3 new projects. I'm like, oh,
at the same time.
Okay.
No. Can you stagger those?
I'm like, that's not going to go well. Oh, no, I got this, Renee. And like a month in, they're like, oh my God, what am I thinking? Because it's a really large commitment of time. And designers need to know that and be okay with that too. And then I'm actually going to ask you, Rebecca, I can't remember. I listen to so many podcasts now, webinars. Someone once said in the last year, I listened to someone that said, for every hour you're in a meeting, and she was talking about decorating and construction, I believe. For every hour you're in a meeting, it generates 2 to 3 hours of work afterwards. And I remember the time I was sort of like, I don't know, I was multitasking, of course. And I remember, like I was writing something. I was like, that's not true. That's bullshit. And then I thought about it later. I'm like, wait a minute. They're on to something. So everybody's like, oh, I've got, 3 meetings today. Okay. Do you have up to 9 hours to do the follow-up work before the next meetings, which in construction might be 2 days later, might be 1 day later. And it was a really aha moment. And hell, I've been doing this happily for 30 years.
I like that. It's like a formula. I like that.
Yeah.
It's so true. Oh,
really sit with that. I mean, it does make sense. And I was like, well, no wonder I'm always feeling behind the gun.
Well, because we make time for the meetings,
yes.
Then we forget that there's those hours of the work. And even when you have a team, because I have a team now,
sure, yeah,
and I delegate, but that team has limited hours, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes you kind of forget, like you're just picturing the key deliverables and milestones without thinking about all the back end. Oh my God. Okay. We could talk about so much.
Yes.
We've totally gone over time.
Yes.
I really appreciate you coming on my podcast. Before we end off today, I always ask our guests to share one last nugget of wisdom. What's your nugget today, Renee?
So my nugget of wisdom is for designers to lean into construction work. I really, truly believe it is going to be a game changer, not only to establish yourself as an expert, but also to equip themselves with the knowledge and skills to build their confidence. I know that the designers have the capabilities, and they just need to have the confidence to follow. And then really the sky is the limit.
I love that. I love that. A lot of designers get a little bit scared and a little bit nervous. And I'm glad that you're here to help. Where can everyone find and follow you?
They can find me on my website, divignedesign.com. Instagram and Facebook are also Divigne Design, to keep it simple. And like Rebecca said, I have a weekly email that usually is about a topic that happened that week on a job site I'm working on. It's fun. I really enjoy that, and usually have a lot of back and forth with people. There's a free download, a pre-renovation checklist on my website, as well as information about my signature course, the Interior Designer's Guide to Construction Management. Lots and lots of things.
Amazing. Such a good resource. I'm so happy you were on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We will continue this.
Absolutely.
And we will carry on our Zooms, and I'm sure you'll be back on the podcast again soon.
Would love that. Thanks, Rebecca.
Isn't Renee awesome? I'm so excited that I've connected with her. We've had so many Zoom calls.
I feel like we could just keep chatting for hours. And I love that I feel like I can call her my friend, and I don't have that many friends in this whole online coaching space. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting. I can't wait to see what we do together in the future. I hope you enjoyed that episode and has got your minds thinking a little bit about how you operate on a job site and what that looks like for the future of your business. Let me know. Join us inside Designer Meetups in the Facebook group if you haven't already joined. Let me know how you found this episode, if you enjoyed it. And if you want to hear more from Renee, you know where to find her. And let me know because we'll have her back. The Resilient by Design podcast is produced by Vera Marquez, edited by Abby Circatella, and hosted by yours truly, Rebecca Hay.